Rents are going up. Yes, the Renters' Right Bill has received royal assent and it will soon become law. Now, regulation is absolutely fine. You know, if it improves the industry, then that's great. It's worthwhile. But unfortunately, unnecessary regulations generally create a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of admins, and in which, as a result, increases a lot of costs for the end user. In this situation, the end user are tenants. So as an example, I've been reviewing I've been paying attention, been following the Renters' Rights Bill quite closely. Everything, you know, is all manageable, but the main concern, the main issue with the Renters' Rights Bill is actually the no minimum term situation. So, what people, landlords, generally the general public, people in the industry, what people don't talk about much are the hidden costs involved in tenanting, specifically the void period, the costs of the void period, and also the turnover costs. Now, typically, as an example, a single let, so a let to a family, is typically 12 months. And there's a good reason for that. It's because the turnover costs, so the costs involved in the tenant moving out, getting the property back to a showroom condition for a new tenant, and the void period in between, so the void between the tenant moving out to a new tenant moving in, all those costs can be quite substantial. Enough, in fact, whereby if the void period is frequent and long, and if the turnover costs are long, then that would actually make the proposition, the endeavor, that investment, that property investment, financially not worthwhile. So what does it involve? When a tenant moves out, they'll give notice. When they've moved out, the property is going to need a lot of remedial works, and then it's going to need a deep clean. That costs a lot of money. If a tenant has been there for a year or longer, generally those costs can be absorbed through the rent, and the landlord will pay for it. Now, if a tenant moves in for a few months and then moves out, there hasn't been enough income generated to absorb those costs to be able to afford to put the property back to a high standard, back to showroom condition for a new tenant. So therefore, the standards of the property will very quickly, very soon drop. You will see across the board that the standards of properties presented to new tenants isn't going to be as good as it used to be. And that's purely due to economics. That's purely because there is not enough money set aside, made from the rent due to the short period of the rental period for the landlord to be able to afford to keep repainting the property, to keep recarpeting, all that sort of stuff. Then you've also got to consider the void and the lettings fees, all the frictional costs. So the lettings fee, let's say, is about 75% of the rent, of 1 month's rent. That's just that alone. If a tenant moves in for, let's say, 3 months, so it's 3 months worth of rent, already the landlord is paying their mortgage, the management costs, and the lettings fees. And then there's a void as well. So obviously, if a tenant moves out, you know, typically there's about a month, 3 weeks to a month of void period, where the tenant moves out, then the works needs to be done while the new tenant is being sourced and found, while the new tenant goes through referencing, and then we've got to agree on the date for the new tenant to move in, because obviously the tenant has their own lives, people have their own lives, they'll want to move in a certain date, which all adds up to a void period. And that void period is typically 3 weeks to 4 weeks, potentially 3 weeks to 2 months. So let's say you lose a month or 2 months worth of rent, plus the lettings fee, plus the remedial work and the cleaning costs to put the property back to showroom condition. To be to be able to only let out that property for 3 months at a time, that is going to be financially not worthwhile. So the impact of this, in my opinion, that's the biggest concern. As a landlord and as a lettings agent, in my opinion, that's the biggest risk, not the abolishment of Section 21. It's actually the fact that there's no minimum term anymore. So be careful what you ask for, but I think, let's see how things play out. But I think realistically, there's a very good chance that if tenants start moving in for, let's say, 3 to 6 months and then moving out again, if that's going to happen across the board, I think we're going to start to see a lot of lower quality properties. And that's simply because the landlord cannot afford the void period, the relettings fees, and to bring the property back to showroom condition for new tenants. Yep, that's what it is, unfortunately, but let's see what happens. Anyway, I'll monitor the situation, and no doubt I will report back to you guys and see, to let you know what we've experienced after the change. But that's what I would expect. Rent. So, long story short, the only way for the market to absorb this is for rents to increase. It's, the end user is always going to have to pay. These costs are going to have to be paid from somewhere, and unfortunately it's the end user that's going to have to pay for it, which means those costs are going to be passed on to the tenant, the end user in this situation, the tenant. So those additional costs will be passed on to the tenant, and it won't be the landlord's fault. It's just the market doing what it does. The other thing is that landlords are also going to be exiting the market as well, because the Renters' Right Bill is a bit draconian. Things are going the wrong way, so it's just not worthwhile for landlords anymore or smaller landlords to invest in properties like this, to provide good quality accommodation for tenants, which means there's a lot less properties available to rent for tenants. And when there's less supply, unfortunately, the costs will go up. So the rent in this situation will go up. Anyway, let's keep an eye out and see what happens. My name's Nguyen. We're letting manage high quality HMOs and single lets in and around Birmingham. And if you like this sort of stuff, don't forget to like and follow for more. All right, see you.